But until then, let's get started with where it all started from. So as I said, just like you guys, I played basketball in elementary school and in high school. I was very involved in the basketball community in Saskatoon and beyond a little bit. And when I got into grade 12, I decided that I wanted to pursue volleyball. So I actually made a shift. The reason why is I love the team sport element of basketball, but I missed snowboarding. So I actually ended up giving up basketball to be able to snowboard, and then promptly broke my collarbone snowboarding, and then that was the end of that. But that was where my shift started. And I had felt like basketball was everything up until that point, until I started to fall in love with something else, and something had to give. And I felt like my basketball career had come to an end, and that was the time to transition into something new. When I went into volleyball, I found out with these big basketball hands, I was actually really great as a middle, and it was a lot of fun. I still had that team element, but the season ended a lot earlier, so I could go and do my own thing through the winter. Winter is my favorite, not in Saskatchewan necessarily, like that -50 brittle cold. That was a little bit different, but man, did I enjoy going and getting pallets and building little jibs in the backyard until I could get out to Sunshine or get out to the mountains to snowboard with some friends. So it was a lot of fun doing that transition. And when I transitioned to volleyball, I was asked to come play college volleyball at the next level when I went to college. And that's kind of where I really found my grit and my determination. And you guys have that. I mean, basketball as a sport is not an easy sport. You guys all can probably attest to that. It's lines, it's sprints, it's early mornings, it's 10,000 shots at the foul line, it's constant grit and grind. And I love that. And I kind of lost that a little bit when I got into more snowboarding and the short season of volleyball. When I got into college volleyball, I was reminded of that grit, and I was reminded of that determination. And then from there, I decided in my second year of volleyball that my grandfather had actually passed away, and I wanted to do something in honor of my grandfather. He had told me, and he was in the hospital. I'll never forget this scenario. I was 17 years old, and I was about to go out on our first snowboarding trip. It was right after I decided to make that move from basketball to volleyball and therefore snowboarding. And I drove a standard car, and my grandfather's friend was also at the hospital, and I was stopping by on my way out of town to go and say goodbye before I went on this trip, just in case something were to happen. And my grandfather's friend was at the hospital at the same time, and he was concerned. My grandfather's friend was concerned that because I was a young woman, I wouldn't be capable of going out to the mountains in a standard vehicle. That sounded like something that should have been beyond my capabilities at that time. And before I could ruffle my feathers and get all hot and bothered, my grandfather, he says, Kieran can do things other people can't. He didn't say Kieran can do things other women can't. He said, Kieran can do things other people can't. He knew that my gender didn't determine the outcome and that I was capable beyond my wildest dreams. I didn't think about that at the time. I just went for it, left the hospital and went on this snowboard trip. And I have always relied on that one sentence that my grandfather shared back then, that Kieran can do things other people can't. And spoiler alert, all of us are capable of that. This wasn't just my grandfather saying me exclusively, I'm the only one that's capable of things that other people aren't. He knows that everybody is capable beyond their wildest dreams, and you are too. You have no idea yet what you're capable of until you're faced with it. And I had no idea of that at the time. I had no idea. I had no idea what he meant. I had no idea what he was trying to imply. I had no idea if he was trying to imply that. But that's what I've gathered from that moment since then. And when my grandfather said that, I knew that, okay, there's got to be something that I can do to prove him right in a way. And so I want to share some photos with you because in honor of my grandfather, I decided that I would cycle across Canada to raise money for prostate cancer research. My grandfather ended up passing away with prostate cancer and it had metastasized to his bones. And that's how the end of his life came about. So I decided that I would pack everything up and I would cycle across Canada to raise money for it. I decided this, I think, based on a little bit of naivety. I did not fully understand how large Canada was. It is unbelievably large as a country. So I decided, and I had never biked before this, you guys, like I biked from my place to Max to get slushies, or from my place to grab a bag of chips, or to my place to a friend's place. I had never done a long cycling trip before this, but I dove in head first and I decided that I was going to do it. Luckily, my dad has done tour cycling. I've been outdoors my entire life. I've been very, very blessed with that ability. My childhood involved outdoor school and a whole bunch of different outdoor experiences. So I felt comfortable being outdoors for that long period of time. But the cycling was something different. And oh my gosh, you guys, was it something different? This photo is me when I finished my first pass. My first pass was the Coquihalla Pass, and it was in BC. And it was unbelievably difficult. I had to pedal for 30 seconds and then brake for 30 seconds. And that's the only thing that kept me going. And during this pass, so this is an 8.5% grade. It's one of the larger passes in BC and in the Rockies. I think it is in the Rocky area. And it was something that I had never experienced before. 8.5% grade is a pretty steep grade. So if you think about trains cannot go steeper than, I believe it's a 3% grade. And that's why when you're driving, if you've driven in the mountains or if you've had that opportunity, you'll see tunnels that kind of go in spirals to keep them going upwards because they can only take so much of a percentage of a grade. So we were doing almost 3 times the percentage of a grade that a train was capable of doing. I definitely wasn't without brakes. I couldn't do it. My father, I have a really great relationship with my parents, which I'm very, very blessed to have. And my father cycled with me from Vancouver to Calgary to kind of get me going on this trip. And there is nothing more embarrassing as a teenage girl. I was 19, I believe. Maybe I was 20 when I did this trip. I think I was 20 when I did this trip. Or I turned 20 on the road at least. And my father would have been 55. And there's nothing more embarrassing as a 20-year-old young woman as your 55-year-old father powering past you, dropping his bags, and then coming back down to cycle it with you. But the worst part of this whole Coquihalla episode of this story was these guys, these construction workers. They came, and I was lucky in the way that half of the road was actually closed off due to construction. So I had like a whole lane to move around in. So I'd pedal for 30 seconds and then brake for 30 seconds and hate my life. And then pedal for 30 seconds, then brake and hate my life. And that was like my existence for a good solid few hours. And these guys, young guys, good looking guys, that sucked. good looking guys come by in a truck, a work truck, and they pull by me and they're like, "Do you want to ride?" And I looked at them and I was like, "Yes." Like, who asks that? Yes, I want to ride. No, I can't take it. Get lost. Like, what are you doing? Of course I want to ride. And I just felt like the world was showing me that I was incapable of doing this, and everybody just wanted to help me out. In the end, I didn't need the help. I didn't need to hand off weight to my dad. I didn't need to jump in the back of this truck with these random men, thank goodness. And I made it. I made it 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. I made it slowly. I made it after complaining a lot, but I made it on my own 2 feet. And so if anything was able to tell me that I was capable beyond measure, it was the fact that I went from cycling to max from a slushy to doing the Coquihalla in 4 days. So as long as you're taking it one step at a time, you're going to get there. My bike trip continued. There were highs, like just incredible moments in this bike trip. I have so many good memories, but there were some pretty intense moments. This is a photo of me. It was plus 50, I think, or 48 or something that day. I'm basically wearing nothing. I was so hot. And I was just getting into Manitoba at this point. And the flies, or I think I was mid-Manitoba at this point, and the flies and the mosquitoes and the black flies, like the little guys, were so bad that my neck started swelling and I couldn't shoulder check because I had so many bug bites on my neck. And those were those little black flies that were getting you around your neck. They didn't bite me too many other places, but the other bugs that would get me were like the honking big horseflies. I clocked a horsefly, no word of a lie, 62 kilometers an hour. So when you're going slow, it's going around your head and it's just buzzing nonstop. And then when you're going fast, it's just ripping beside you like it's some race. And then you go slow again when you're down the hill and you're pedaling again, and then it's going around your head. And then you'd think that, okay, we're done for the day, we've eaten, time to go to bed. No bugs at that point. Absolutely not. The bugs would go around your head during the day, around your head while you're cooking, and then around your tent as you slept. And now I feel like I have PTSD from the noise of flies. I can't handle the buzzing of the flies. It was nonstop for 30 days, give or take. It was unbelievable. So this was my bug getup. It was intense. I graduated from the fly swatter to the electric fly swatter at one point, and I felt like Laura Croft on a bicycle. It was intense. I was ready to annihilate all of these bugs. I was like a mini SWAT team. So that was the bugs. The road itself was insane. It was, some places were beautiful. Quebec has a beautiful cycling path. It's called Route Vert, the Green Route. And it's, that was my Frenchness. That's my French accent. I have no ability to speak any French. It's unfortunate. But it's just this long, big, wide trail where bikers can go. It goes all the way across Quebec. It's really nice. BC, at the time that I was doing this, the Trans-Canada Trail was starting to erect itself, and BC had a lot of Trans-Canada Trail set up. Alberta had a little bit. But this road was actually one of the better sections of Ontario. The Trans-Canada Highway in Northern Ontario was awful. I had a few very close calls in Ontario. This photo was taken by my father. So when I first entered Ontario and the highway started getting bad, I was cycling. I carried all of my weight behind me. So I had my tent, my gear, everything. And I had it in a bob trailer, which you saw earlier. I had also tried panniers along the way, and I ended up switching to a bob trailer into the route a little bit. But I usually had this bob trailer with all of my gear behind me. And I was cycling up. Ontario ended up having steeper hills than BC, which actually really shocked me. I thought that BC would be the mountains, so therefore it would be biggest hills that I'd climb. They may have been the biggest in size lengthwise, but Ontario had 10 to 10.5% grades that I was not expecting. Ontario is very interesting. Ontario beats a lot of cyclists. Most people that do this trip and don't make it, those people end up quitting in Ontario. Ontario, each province before then takes anywhere from 4 to 10 days to get through. Ontario takes over 30. It's huge. It's not safe. The bugs are insane, just like in Manitoba. They get worse as you go into Ontario. You get some crazy weather in Ontario and in the summer as well. These hills are very steep. It beats a lot of people and it beats them mentally. Everybody's capable by this point to cycle Ontario, but it beats them mentally. And I'm going to get back to that in a second here. Keep that in mind. In this case, I'm not having any of my weight on myself or my bike at this point because I was cycling with everything. I was alone and I was pedaling and I'm looking down and I see something whiz by my feet real quick. And I looked up and there was a truck and trailer, and the trailer had forgotten to pull up their stairs. So it's a safety concern if you're driving. You're basically driving a plow that would just plow through people. And the year before me, 6 bikers passed away when they got plowed through by a trailer's stairs. And I stopped immediately. I couldn't continue. That was my worst fear going into the trip, was that this set of stairs would plow me down. And I just experienced that inches away from my tires and inches away from my pedals. So I called my dad, and luckily, so my dad's a firefighter, so he had shift work, and he was able to alternate shifts and come and flag me down so that people could see me. So he would be in his truck behind me with the hazards on. And so for a bit of Ontario during the really sketchy side area or the shoulder there, I was able to release my weight and just focus on getting through it as quickly as possible. So I was really lucky there. There was a few close calls in Ontario. People didn't like me on the highway. I don't think you can tell in that photo, but the highway is actually very narrow in a lot of places in northern Ontario. There was one point where I had a semi coming in front and I had a semi coming behind. I didn't know the semi was behind me, that they were going to pass at the same point. I was as far over as I possibly could make it. In this photo, this is all gravel and you'd sink in. In the portion of the road that I'm talking about, I was actually stuck and there was a barrier beside me. So there is no physical way I could move over as a cyclist. And it was a barrier for quite a while. And these 2 semis passed by me at the exact same time as I was there, and their mirrors actually hit, their side mirrors hit, because they were trying to give me every ounce of room that they could without me becoming a bug on their grill. And that was terrifying as well. I had cars in Ontario that would swerve in front of me and then gas up so that they'd kick rocks at me, so that they would be telling me get off the road in a very aggressive way, but they're telling me to get off the road. Ontario is not friendly to cyclists. It was very scary. But I made it through Ontario. The hottest day that I cycled through was a 48-degree day. I actually climbed into this ice machine and sat in there for a little bit just to cool off. It was insane. But with the lows, there's highs as well. And referring back to that list that I had learned along the way in my life, I'm going to talk to you about what these highs and lows really mean and why, frankly, I think that happiness is a crock of shit. Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that. I hope I'm okay to say that. But happiness is not necessarily the goal. It's seeing these highs and lows for what they are and enjoying the moment as you go through it. And we're going to get to that in a second. But I want to talk to you. I've talked to you about all of the lows for a little bit. I want to talk to you about some of the highs. the highs actually involved people. And that, I think, is a really beautiful thing. Both of my, or many of my highs involved other people. This is probably the happiest moment I had on the entire cycling trip, except for a surprise birthday that was thrown for me, which was amazing. And that involved people as well. I ended up being in Saskatoon for my birthday. So that was lucky. I was hoping it would be timed that way, but it ended up working out. This was definitely a high. That's my dad's truck in the background. I'm in Ontario. That's my dad's truck. This was him coming out the next day after that close call, and the relief that I felt was quite significant. So this was a really good moment, and again, it involved people. The other really big high was the moment that I finished my trip. So I cycled through Ontario. I took the northern route, and then I went through Ottawa. Then I went up through Quebec. I enjoyed Quebec immensely. I met some friends along the way. I went to concerts. I took a couple days off in Quebec. It was beautiful. I ended up just meeting them by fluke, swimming in rivers, and it was just great. And then I went from Quebec down through New Brunswick, so through Edmundston, Fredericton, and then to Moncton. I had some friends in Moncton that I stayed with there as well. And then I went across the bridge to PEI. You're not allowed to cycle across that bridge, so I had to get a shuttle. So I shuttled across to PEI, and then my mom met me there. She had flown out, and Mom would go with me for the rest of the way. She finished the trip with me in the car behind me, and I cycled, and she would shop during the day and I would cycle, or she would go and have a cup of coffee by the ocean and I'd cycle, and then she would meet me, and we'd continue for the night and find somewhere to stay or camp or whatever it might be. The whole way I camped until my mom met me, and my mom kind of wanted to splurge a little bit more, and we ended up staying in friends' places or getting a hotel if we wanted to or things like that. But for the majority of the trip, I camped, and so that had become home for me. So we'd wrap up the evening by a river, by a lake, and listen to the birds as we cooked dinner and watched the sunset and head into our tents. And then from PEI, it was a very, very short little jaunt. And then we took the ferry to Nova Scotia, and then I biked up through Nova Scotia to the tip. Nova Scotia was very interesting. I found that very beautiful. And then I ferried to Newfoundland, and I finished the trip in Newfoundland. This was me at the end of the trip. I don't have any of my bags. I look like I haven't been cycling because at the time I hadn't been. I'm wearing my mucklucks. I'm wearing sunglasses that would be ridiculous a little bit to bike with. I had finished the trip. The next day, I had less than a kilometer to the coastline. So we were staying at a little Airbnb, I think it was, or maybe a hotel. I think maybe that was before Airbnb actually existed. And then I hopped on my bike and I just quickly ripped to the ocean and dipped my tire in the ocean. That moment was surreal. It felt like it was just never going to come. When I was on this bike trip, every moment was difficult. Every moment I had to decide if I wanted to continue forward, and every single moment felt like it was against me in a way. But one pedal after another, I made it to this moment, and it ended. It did end in the end. I didn't think it would, but it did. And I didn't know this, but my mom had called ahead to the Prostate Cancer Canada representative in Newfoundland, and they had arranged a surprise for me. So when I arrived at the ocean, there was a bunch of people there, and this man came up to me and he said, thanks for what I was doing. And he said that the ships in the harbor usually play a symphony to celebrate things, and today we're going to play a symphony for you. He got on his phone, and then all of a sudden, where I was standing in the harbor was looking out at the ocean, but right beside me was a big inlet where all the boats were. And it was quite a large inlet. So it was, and then there was big hills on either side of it. Newfoundland's quite hilly. And so the sound, it echoes in there. It's very beautiful. And there's probably about 40 or 50 ships playing their horns in this beautiful symphony to celebrate the completion of my bike trip. It was incredible. It was difficult. It was everything. It was absolutely every human experience that you could have. I'll tell you now that if I could cycle across Canada, the majority of people can cycle across Canada. I didn't train. I trained on the Coquihalla. Let's be serious. That was my training. I didn't know what I was getting into, but when you're faced with a challenge, you just accept it and you charge forward. I got there one pedal at a time, and I wouldn't have even imagined that this would be possible if it wasn't for my outlandish dream of just cycling across Canada and frankly not understanding how big it was. So for my trip, I was gone for 74 days in total. I was on my bike on the seat for 59 of those 74 days, and the rest of them were days off in certain areas, mostly visiting with friends along the way. I would accomplish about 110 kilometers a day. The first day was we did 80 kilometers that day, but we got lost in Vancouver with a lot of construction. So we maybe in that 80 kilometers actually had about 30 of them moving forward. And that night I bawled my eyes out in my tent. I was so overwhelmed. And then it just became normal by the end of it. Every single day, just being on your bike and charging through, you come and you adapt very quickly, and you just come to see this as the new norm. So 59 days in the saddle, 74 days in total, about 110 kilometers a day. That's on average. It was something around 7,500 kilometers by the end of the trip. Or a little bit more than that, maybe closer to 8,000 kilometers. And it was the trip of a lifetime. It was incredible. It took me, I was very determined, actually, very determined to get back at a certain time. I got back the Friday that I wanted to get back because we have a big festival in one of the where I went to school in BC, a small town in BC. And that's where I'd gone to college and played volleyball. So I had to make it back for that festival. I absolutely had to. So that was my drive and my determination. One thing I didn't share with you guys was prior to this trip, I was in a relationship with a guy, and we were planning a wedding, and I was absolutely in love with this man. And he's a great man. And years later, we connected as friends, and he's not primary in my life by any means, but he's a friend, and it's great. But right before the trip, actually a matter of days before this trip, we broke up, and it was very shocking to me. Actually, he told me that he just didn't love me anymore. And I was heading out to a wedding that day that was in Ontario. So I was flying to Ontario for 2 days for this wedding, and then I was flying back home, driving out to BC, and going right on this trip. So within the day, he said that he didn't love me anymore. He packed up all my stuff while I was in Ontario, and I got back. He moved everything from his place to my parents' place, that they have a small under construction house there, so that I had everything in a storage house, and that was it. And it happened so quickly, and I was so heartbroken at the beginning of this trip. But when you spend 74 days on your own, getting to know yourself, getting to know the highs and the lows, getting to know what irks you and what doesn't, when you spend 74 days daydreaming about ways that you can get out of camping that night, to the point that I was trying to figure out why, or like how I could get arrested without being charged for anything, having no record, and then be released the next morning so I could keep cycling. Because in my head, a jail cell might have a toilet and it would be cool. It would have air conditioning, and that sounded amazing, which is just so crazy that my mind just focused on these weird little daydreams of how I could escape my reality. So I spent 74 days in this weird healing phase. And then when I arrived back in my hometown where he was, I was a new woman. I went from seeing a life with this man, and that's the only thing I saw for myself, to not imagining anything different. So I'm going to get back into the healing and the love side of things as well. I want to recycle back to when I talked about Ontario. I fully believe that you are capable beyond your wildest dreams. And the reason why I think that is because of who I was when I started this journey. I was this heartbroken, not motivated. I just was so sad and so heavy. You know, that heavy feeling when you're just heavy and you just don't feel like doing anything. That's who I started out as. I had no idea what I was getting into. I wasn't physically trained to do this, and I felt awful. And then I get to Ontario, and Ontario was a slog. It was so hard for so many days. There's another guy that had started cycling around the same time. And when you cycle across Canada, there is only a select group of people that are also cycling across Canada. And through blogs or through newspaper features or whatever it ended up being, we found each other along the way. This individual, he was a cyclist. We met right off the hop in Vancouver. We are leaving on the same day, and we are doing the same trip, but he would clock like 160, 200 kilometers a day. He just dove in. Oh my gosh. I remember the first day he cycled with us, and then the second day he was like, I got to do this my own pace because you guys are super slow. And so my poor dad wanted to cycle at his pace, and he's stuck at my pace that's just super slow and learning my own way. And this guy just takes off. We met up again in, I don't know, maybe Revelstoke, and then in Saskatoon, and like all of these different places along the way where he would take like 2, 3, 4 days, maybe 5 days off and just relax. He got to Ontario, and he was cycling through Ontario, and I got a text message on my phone, and I knew that I was probably in Uppsala, Ontario, which is kind of in the boonies, but near the beginning of Ontario. So I knew he was getting close to Ottawa because he had powered through, and at that point he was probably about 20 days ahead of me. And I got a text message, and he said, I'm going home. I'm done. I am going home. And that was the moment that I realized that truthfully, you can do whatever you want to do in this world. You are capable beyond your wildest dreams. Because if somebody that cycled long distances all the time, he was a bike racer, he was a cyclist through and through. If somebody that could do 200 kilometers in a day, no problem, was quitting in Ontario, it told me that the majority of things that we do in life are mental and not physical. And your mental stamina will get you through an Ontario-sized task. So I definitely had this realization that if I'm going to cycle across Canada, I'm not going to physically cycle across Canada. I'm going to mentally cycle across Canada. And that's what my trip became. And that's probably why I got through Ontario, because it was gnarly. It was insane. So that's my bike trip side of things. I usually spend a little bit more time on the bike trip than anything else. But it was the most amazing life lesson that I've ever had. Since then, my adventures didn't stop. I went from playing volleyball in college and doing the cycling trip to taking a break from college and deciding what I wanted to do. After this break, I took a semester off. I traveled. I went to Europe. I came back, and instead of pursuing a degree in education, I started pursuing my degrees in business. And I wanted to do my sustainable business practices degree, focusing my business degree on environmental and social practices and why that's so important for a business, as well as a management and marketing minors. So I focused on that instead. I completed my business degree, and then I actually went to I went back to Saskatoon from BC, back to Saskatoon. I started a career at a software development company. I was there for 2 years, and the itch to do something else hit me. I ended up converting a school bus into a house, and I lived on the road for about a year. This was totally full of highs and lows and breakdowns and learning the bus mechanics and more breakdowns and more breakdowns and more breakdowns along the way. I mostly lived along the California coast. I'd surf and I would climb, and it was an incredible trip. It was a short bus. I lived in a short bus. It was totally off-grid, and it didn't have much for power. I didn't plug things in during the day or during the evening. I would charge my stuff as I drove. It didn't have running water. I just had portable water. I was worried that with the California droughts, I wouldn't be able to receive water anywhere. So I decided to just have a little small jug and continually refill that, because it was easier to ask for a small jug of water than a huge bus full of water. So that was my last big trip. It was incredible. I learned so much along the way as well. And what I learned there is that people will judge you, guaranteed. 100% of the time, people are judging you. And it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to me that a lot of men would judge me with this bus, assuming that I would need help, when I knew what I was doing when it came to the mechanics of the bus. After learning a lot through breakdowns, I could learn to fix what I needed to fix. And when I didn't know what to fix or didn't know how to fix it, I would head to a cat dealership and I would get them to do it, and that was fine, and I'd learn along the way, and I didn't always need somebody's help. But people will judge you. People will 100% judge you along the way, and that's a part of life. And it was this incredible release where I didn't care what people thought anymore. So that was that road trip. It was a lot of fun. Since then, I got back from this road trip, and what I had heard frequently on the road trip was that I was brave for a girl. Yes, that was added to that thought process, that I was brave for a girl. And that whole idea just drives me up the wall. So when I got back, I created an Instagram account. And the Instagram account was the Lady Alliance. And it started off as a blog and a photo gallery where I would showcase other women's adventures, because I was no longer adventuring myself. I came back from the bus trip. I got into a full-time job, and I loved it. And I was in an office all the time. And so I wanted to showcase other women's adventures and show how brave we as women are, and that our gender, again, doesn't determine our outcome. And so the Lady Alliance was born. I did not think that it would become a thing. Fast forward 3 years later, and the Lady Alliance is now my full-time job. What I do is there's multifaceted events with the Lady Alliance. Currently not now, obviously, with COVID, we're all stuck at home. I'm stuck at home, but what we do as the Lady Alliance is we offer mountain retreats. So we get together as groups of ladies and we go and take over a backcountry hut, and we just enjoy a weekend retreat together. It involves hiking and yoga and good vibes and healing, and it's just feels so good. We've gone to Bali. Hopefully, if COVID allows, we are going to Nicaragua for our surf and yoga retreat. We do surf and yoga global retreats, and then we do local Canadian hiking retreats. So that's one element, and that's kind of where we started. That was our first ever event. Since then, we've grown to offer navigation courses, mother-child safety courses, avalanche safety courses, and then we've expanded beyond there as well. And our main goal is to unite the communities and to unite local communities. So now I have 30 women, give or take, I think it's 24 maybe, 24 women across North America running mini events through the Lady Alliance. So they're called chapters, and these Lady Alliance chapters, we have a Lady Alliance chapter in Seattle, Toronto, Saskatoon. We have Lady Alliance chapters in Washington, D.C., Denver, Vancouver, Kelowna, kind of all over the place. And these chapter coordinators are women that lead free events for women so that we can further build the community. And then on top of that, I personally work as an event coordinator to bring events to each one of these communities. So I do what is called tours, and I work with our clients. Our clients include Mountain Equipment Co-op, Arc'teryx, Fjallraven, and Mammut, and different big brands like that, where we bring them as a brand into the community for a specific event. So maybe that's our Women's Empowerment Tour, where we bring in female speakers to help motivate and empower women in the local community. Or maybe that's our Adventure Safety Tour, where we talk about ropes and tying knots and self-rescue. Maybe it's our film tours, and we do film festivals, and we'll have outdoor film nights. So that's what I do now. And it all started with an Instagram account 3 years ago, and it's become my full-time job. So the adventures didn't stop. It didn't stop with basketball. It didn't stop with volleyball. All of these things had their sections in my life, but none of it stopped completely. It flowed. It went from basketball into volleyball, and then it went from basketball into snowboarding. And from snowboarding and volleyball, it went into my cycling trip. And from my cycling trip, it went into my bus trip and into my careers, and now into my business. And so it's been an incredible journey. And it's just been a journey of learning, really, is what it is. That's my every day, is a journey in learning.